Welcome to this week's Torah Perspective, Parshas Vayigash. This week's Sedre has the epic confrontation between Yehuda and Yosef. We all know the backstory. Binyamin has been arrested. Yosef threatens to put Binyamin in prison and to enslave him. He says to the other brothers, "You go, but Binyamin stays here and is my prisoner." And Yehuda cannot contain himself, and he approaches Yosef daringly and starts pleading, telling the story in painful detail, the back and forth. We came the first time and you wanted to see Binyamin, and then we came the second time and we brought Binyamin with us, and I am responsible for the lad's well-being. Let's see some words that Yehuda uses in his speech. He mentions that he is a surety for the safe return of Binyamin. He has made himself an orev, a guarantor. The word orev, Ayin Reish Beit, is not itself found here. It's the verb la'arov, to become a surety, that is being used. Interesting side note, in English we have the expression earnest money that dates, I think, from the 15th century, but it is derived from an old French word, ereh, which comes from a Latin word, ara, which most scholars agree is from the Hebrew erovan or aravan. So earnest money is the same as orev. Anyway, why is orev a surety? Ayin Reish Beit also means a mixture. Yerbuvior or le arbev means to mix. And even the word erev, evening, has this connotation of mixing in it because it mixes the daylight with the darkness. Darkness falls slowly, and even in English we call it evening. It evens out. In Hebrew we have the expression bein hashmoshas, which is something like twilight. Twilight also has this notion of doubleness. Twilight, two lights. The light of the day and, in inverted commas, the light of the night, the darkening of the light. So mixing is a notion that is connected with being a surety. It means that you mix your fate with the fate of someone else. If I'm a guarantor for a loan, I don't owe the money, but when I mix myself with the debtor, it means that I am also responsible for the debtor's debts, for the debtor's obligations to pay back his loan. That's the notion of orev. Here, Yehuda says, I am an orev for Binyamin. That is to say, I cannot separate my fate from his fate. So therefore, I take responsibility for him, and I need to give an account of his well-being. I must report back to my father. And how can I come back to my father and Binyamin is not with me? That is impossible. It's interesting that he calls Binyamin in his speech the whole time Na'ar, a lad. Well, Binyamin was not a young child anymore. He had many children himself already. So why does he call Binyamin a Na'ar, a lad? If you go back to the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev, we find that Yosef is called Na'ar there. And Na'ar seems to be one of the reasons that he behaved like a Na'ar, that he provoked the jealousy or the disapproval of his brothers. It's very, very interesting that Yehuda, in his speech to Yosef, refers to Binyamin as a Na'ar. There seems to be a switch of places. In the place where Yosef was before, namely the beloved child of Rachel, the apple of his father's eye, who got a beautiful Technicolor dream coat from his father and was the apple of his eye, it's as if Yosef is switched for Binyamin here. That Binyamin, in the speech of Yehuda, plays the role that Yosef played in the beginning of Vayeshev. In the beginning of Vayeshev, Yosef is called a Na'ar. Here Yehuda calls Binyamin a Na'ar. And in Vayeshev, Yehuda was instrumental in making sure that the brothers did not kill Yosef. It was Yehuda who said, we shouldn't kill him, we should rather sell him into slavery. So Yehuda took some responsibility for Yosef's well-being, but not so much to prevent his being sold as a slave. This role switch of Yosef and Binyamin is very, very interesting because it gives Yehuda the opportunity to redeem himself, to find an answer to the questions that rage in his mind. It's difficult for us to read these words without knowing that the end will be good, that everything will be all right, that Binyamin will be released, that this oppressive Egyptian official is none other than their own brother, Yosef. But we must resist the temptation of reading the story in that way. We must go with the flow of the narrative, and we must read the words as if we hear them for the first time. I quoted this before, but there's a medrash in Tanchuma that says that Yehi divrei Torah regilim beficha ilu shematem hayom misinai. The words of Torah should be fluid in your mouth. The words of Torah should be familiar to you as if you heard them for the first time today from Sinai. It seems a complete contradiction. If they are regilim beficha, if you are well aware of these words, you know them intimately well, you cannot hear them as if you hear them today for the first time. Nevertheless, despite the fact that we know these words very well, we must make an endeavor to hear them every time anew and have a fresh look at them. So that's what I'm trying to do today. And I want to concentrate on the word Vayigash, and he approached. We find this word Vayigash 5 times in the book of Bereshit, in Genesis. And I will discuss these confrontations, these Vayigash, these approaches with you today. The root of Vayigash is Nun Gimel Shin. It doesn't simply mean to approach, it means to confront. And we find this in the story in Toldus, when Yaakov goes to his father, Yitzchak, to get the blessings and has disguised himself as Esau. And his father says, you have to come nearer. Let me see if you are my son Esau. It says there, Vayigash Yaakov al Yitzchak Oviv. And Yaakov approached, I want to say confronted now, his father Yitzchak. It's a very strange thing that Yaakov does this, and that the Torah uses this language of Vayigash, confronted. It's almost as if Yaakov invites his father Yitzchak to find out who he is. And Yitzchak comes perilously close to actually discover the deception. Because what does it say? Vayigash Yaakov el Yitzchak Oviv, Vayimushehu, Vayomer, Hakal Kal Yaakov, Vayodayim Yedei Esau. He approached, he confronted his father Yitzchak, and his father Yitzchak felt him, tried to feel as somebody who cannot see very well does, and then says, I hear the voice of Yaakov, but I feel the hands of Esau. This was a confrontation. This was not just approaching him. No, it was approaching him with risk. It is a confrontation. We find another time that this word Vayigash is being used, and that is when Yaakov meets Rochel, who would become his beloved wife. The story is that Rochel was shepherding the flock of her father, and there was a well that was covered with a very heavy stone, and nobody could lift the stone from the mouth of the well. And Yaakov, when he saw Rochel and he saw the flock of Rochel that belonged to her father, he approached. It says there, Vayika asher ro'o Yaakov es Rochel bas Lovam achi imau, ves tzad Lovam achi imau. When Yaakov saw Rochel, his mother's brother's daughter, and the flock of his mother's brother, then Vayigash Yaakov, then Yaakov approached. He confronted an unbelievable challenge. He had to lift this heavy, heavy stone from the well, which was humanly impossible. But somehow he found the strength. This was also a confrontation with a problem, a confrontation with something that needs a solution right now. And then we have the most telling of them all. And that is when Avraham Avinu approaches God. He approaches Hashem on behalf of the people of Sodom and Amorah, the people who inhabited 5 cities in the Kikar, in the plain, which is today the plain around the Dead Sea, but was in those days a very wealthy and very prosperous area. And then it says, Vayigash Avram Vayomer, and Avram confronted God and said, Ha'af ispet tzadikim rosho, will you then exterminate the innocent together with the guilty? Imagine going to God and criticizing God's handling of justice in the world. Hashafet kol ha'oretz lo ya'aseh mishpat, shall then the judge of the entire world not do justice? This was an unbelievable. One would think such a thing is almost impossible, but Avraham did it. This is what Vayigash means. Vayigash means to confront and to grab the bull by the horns and to do something that seems to be impossible. Yaakov approached his father and deceived him, which for Yaakov, ish emes, for Yaakov, a man dedicated to truth, must have been a tremendous challenge to do such a thing. For Yaakov, when he comes to the well and meets Rachel and lifts this stone, which is on a physical level, but nevertheless, even on that level, it is a challenge that needs to be confronted. And then finally, today in Parshas Vayigash, Yehuda approaches and does something that must have cost him a lot of strength to do something that must have been extremely difficult to confront Yosef, the Egyptian dictator, Egyptian potentate, the Egyptian official who has life and death in his hands, and to gamble everything for the release of his brother Binyamin. This was Yehuda's redemption. This was the moment where Yehuda took responsibility. And that qualified him to be the ancestor of Malchus Beis David, the house of David. If you go through the life of King David, of David HaMelech, you can see how David confronted things that were very hard. The other day, I reviewed the episode when David meets Shaul HaMelech, King Saul. Shaul was asleep in a cave. And David had the chance to kill Shaul HaMelech, King Saul. This Shaul HaMelech had been pursuing him, would not have hesitated to kill him, actually had come close to killing him a few times. And here David had a golden opportunity to get rid of his enemy, but he didn't. He realized that his time had not yet come, that it was not up to him to force the matter, and he restrained his hand, and he did not kill Shaul HaMelech. Where did David HaMelech get this tremendous inner strength, this tremendous moral rectitude from? Despite the mistakes that David may have made in his life, he got it from Yehuda. Yehuda, his name means Haudah, acknowledgement, thanksgiving. Hapam Odes Hashem, says his mother when he was born. This time I will thank God. But thanks in Hebrew, Haudah is not just thanks. It is first and foremost acknowledgement. It is recognizing what the source of one's blessing is, and then give thanks for it. This recognition, we call it in Hebrew also hakor satov, the discernment of the recognition of the good that you have experienced from someone. That strength of character came from Yehuda. Yehuda's life story was full with mistakes that he made. We recall the episode with Tamar, his daughter-in-law, his widowed daughter-in-law, whom he maltreated by not giving her his third son to marry, which was her right, which she expected and which he had promised. And then Tamar had to resort to underhand tactics to seduce her father-in-law to be impregnated by him. Not today the place or the time to discuss that story. It's a very interesting story. There's a lot of explanation and a lot of questions can be asked. One day we'll talk about that as well. But what we must see is that when Yehuda was then confronted with the truth, and Tamar sent him 3 items to his belonging and said, Hakeano, recognize, acknowledge to whom these belong. This proves your involvement and my innocence. Yehuda had the strength of character to say, Sodokomimeni, she is more righteous than I am. This ability to confront not just the other, but oneself, that was the strength of Yehuda. And that is why he was triumphant on this day of Vayigash in love, Yehuda.